Chicago in December isn't as bone-chilling as New York, but it's cold enough to make you think twice about lingering outside. On Monroe Street, the wind sliced through the gaps between glass towers, whistling through coat seams, painting a morning that seemed perfectly ordinary, yet was on the verge of being changed forever by one very small detail: a pair of shoes. Chancellor Holt stood in front of the Elridge and Miles building. There was no power insignia stitched on his sleeve, no bodyguards flanking him, no luxury car idling at the curb. He wore a plain white shirt, clean but not starched, under a faded ash gray canvas jacket, earth-tone chinos, and a pair of pale gray New Balance sneakers. The kind of shoes worn by dads taking their kids to the park on a Sunday, not the kind expected in the marble lobby of a billion-dollar investment firm. His leather shoulder bag was unbranded, genuine leather, creased and worn with age. It had followed him across state lines back in the early days of his logistics startup, when he still drove the delivery truck himself to save on hiring costs. For Chancellor, the bag and the shoes weren't status symbols. They were memory. They were fragments of the long road that brought him to this day. And today, he wasn't here to give orders, not to take the spotlight. He was here to observe, to see whether this firm, into which he had just poured nearly $200 million, deserved the prestige it flaunted. The reports were immaculate, but Chancellor had learned early on that corporate culture doesn't live inside spreadsheets. It lives in the lobby, in the bathroom, in how an ordinary person is treated when they walk in with nothing to prove. He stepped inside. The lobby of Elridge and Miles looked like a minimalist art museum: light gray marble floors, dark wood paneling, pendant lights hanging like suspended planets, cream-colored lounge chairs scattered around glass coffee tables. A person could sit there for hours without anyone asking their name, so long as they looked like they fit in. But Chancellor didn't sit. He walked straight up to the reception desk, where a young blonde woman sat behind a laptop, her makeup neutral, posture crisp in a black uniform. She looked up as soon as the automatic doors whispered open. Her eyes scanned Chancellor like a QR code reader, from hair to face, outfit, and finally the shoes. And that's where the decision was made. "Good morning," she said politely, but with the flat tone of an automated message. HR only sees people with scheduled appointments. If you're here to make a delivery or interview for an entry-level position, please use the rear entrance. Chancellor stopped. He wasn't surprised, but something in his eyes quieted. Not sadness, but recording, like he had just jotted a mental note into an invisible ledger. He smiled slightly, not sarcastic, just enough to keep her from feeling embarrassed. "I'm not making a delivery, and I'm not here for a job interview," he said. His voice was low, warm, each word clear, like someone who had given countless speeches, even though this was a setting where no one would expect such command. She blinked, then glanced at her screen. "Your name, sir?" "Holt. Chancellor Holt." Her fingers tapped quickly. "Sorry, I don't see your name on today's appointment list. And as I mentioned, attire must meet corporate standards. Collared shirt, dress pants, leather shoes. Sneakers are not permitted, especially not if you're headed to the executive floors." Chancellor tilted his head slightly, eyes calm. The receptionist still didn't know that the man standing in front of her wasn't just any visitor. He was the owner of the building, the newly minted majority shareholder, and the person who could decide who stayed and who left. But he said nothing. He gave a gentle nod, as if agreeing with everything, and turned to walk back outside. The sidewalk felt colder now, the wind a bit stronger. He paused before the building's massive glass window and looked at his reflection, a middle-aged black man. No title, nothing remarkable, and a pair of shoes that didn't fit the mold. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up with one pinned conversation. "Jerome, legal and operations." He typed and sent a brief message. "Activate Miles protocol. I need a new applicant file. Name, Miles Chandler. Position, intern, no pay." No emojis, no explanation. But for Jerome, who had executed some of Chancellor's coldest acquisitions, those few words meant one thing: a storm had been set in motion. Chancellor slipped the phone back into his pocket and adjusted his collar. He looked up to the top floor, where the board of directors was likely discussing KP is, next quarter's strategy, and profit margins with no human face. They wouldn't know, at least not yet, that one of next week's new interns had the power to shut the company down mid-meeting if he chose to. And it all started with a cold morning, a single dismissal, and a pair of shoes that didn't fit the part. The ID badge was printed on a plain white background. The name Miles Chandler sat in uncapitalized black letters beneath a QR code and an employee number. The headshot was taken hastily. Chancellor Holt wore rimless glasses, kept a patchier beard than usual, and had dyed his hair a light brown. No one at the company had ever met him in person, and the few executive documents with his photo were outdated. With just enough disguise, no one had a reason to question that Miles was anything but an average, perhaps even forgettable intern. That was the plan. At 6:48 a.m. on Monday, Miles Chandler stepped into the ground floor elevator at Elridge and Miles alongside two IT staffers chatting about their weekend. One of them glanced at his badge, gave a polite nod, and resumed discussing last night's Bulls-Pacers game. No one asked what department he worked in. No one cared. That was exactly the blind spot Chancellor needed to see clearly. Third floor, operations support and internal documentation. An open space with more than 30 modular desks, evenly bright white lighting, rows of silver filing cabinets, and scattered high-volume printers. This was where business units sent requests for contracts, draft documents, confidentiality plans, and internal reports. A floor no one visited unless they had to, which made it the perfect place to see the truth behind a company. Who takes initiative, who gets ignored, who's left out of conversations, and why. Miles was assigned a seat next to the main printer by Jessica, the internship coordinator. His first task, cross-check document serial numbers and sort hard copies before sending them to accounting. Pretty simple, she said during orientation, but it requires precision. One mistake is enough for HR to come calling. She wasn't joking. Within the first 2 hours, Miles witnessed another intern, a young Asian guy named Danny, get publicly scolded for misfiling accounting papers into the inter-office delivery box. Jessica didn't yell, but her voice carried far enough for half the floor to hear. Danny bowed his head and mumbled an apology. As he returned to his seat, a nearby employee whispered, "Kid probably won't last the week." Miles simply observed. He didn't interfere, didn't comfort. The CEO in him wanted to act, but the intern needed to stay silent. That was the hardest part. Watching others belittle the powerless, remembering every detail without showing a flicker of reaction. Because if he reacted, he'd be exposed. And if exposed, the entire experiment would collapse. By noon, all new interns were taken to lunch by a group of coordinators. None of them were directors. They sat in the third-floor pantry, a room with 3 long tables, a vending machine, and a microwave that permanently bore a sign, "Broken, awaiting repair." Monica was the first to acknowledge Miles as he stood staring at the microwave, despite its obvious dysfunction. "It's pointless," she said, sitting at the adjacent table. "We reported it 3 months ago. Tech keeps saying, not in the priority budget." She handed him an apple. "Here, eat this. It's not hot, but at least it doesn't need a warranty." Monica Carlton, sharp features, petite frame, a nasal-tinged voice with a hint of New Jersey. She wore a delicate gold-plated chain with an M pendant and had her natural curls tied back with a fabric ribbon. No one explicitly told Miles she was a Princeton grad, held a master's in development economics, or used to work for a community fund in D.C. But the way she held her water cup, the way she looked at people when they spoke, and especially the way she patiently explained internal policies to new interns, told him everything. This was someone trained to lead, and now she was an uncredited assistant. "You're Miles?" she asked. "I'm Monica, no formal title. They call me special support, which basically means I do everything no one else wants to." Miles nodded. "Sounds like I'm heading that way too." Monica chuckled, not out of joy. "Welcome to Elridge and Miles, where talent is measured by leather shoes and hair color." Lunch lasted less than 20 minutes. By policy, interns got exactly 30 minutes, including the time it took to wait in line. As everyone prepared to return to work, Monica stood and turned to Miles. "If you need a quiet spot to breathe, storage room on the 3rd floor, end of the left hallway. No one goes in there. It smells like damp paper. But I think it's the only place here where your thoughts don't get drowned out." Miles took note, And just as she said after his shift, he walked into that storage room. It was dim inside, lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb, but it was quiet. No eyes, no ears. He sat down between stacks of old files, pulled out his phone, and opened his notes app. The first thing he typed, starting to see early signs, segregation, systemic, habitual, silent. He looked down at his new shoes. They weren't white anymore. Dust from the papers and the wooden floor had left a fine gray layer. Chancellor Holt, now Miles Chandler, had officially stepped into the belly of the beast he once thought could be tamed with capital. But it turns out some things can't be changed from the top down. They have to be peeled back from the inside, layer by layer, person by person, gaze by gaze. And he was exactly where he needed to be to do just that. Elridge and Miles was one of the first private investment firms to proudly use the term cultural balance in its recruitment reports. They had entire slide decks on workforce diversity, programs titled Mentorship for All, and a code of conduct that encouraged barrier-free communication between departments. On paper, it was a professional utopia. But in his second week as an intern, Miles Chandler, better known as Chancellor Holt, began to notice that what actually ran this company wasn't written in policies. It was embedded in habits, small, seemingly harmless habits. But each one was a link in a system that had long been silently classifying people by standards no one dared to write down. It started on a Wednesday lunch break. Monica invited Miles downstairs to try the executive cafe, an internal dining area unofficially described as for level 4 employees and up. Technically, Monica said, anyone can go in, but realistically, no one wants to test it. She said this while they stood in the third-floor hallway. One direction led to the common pantry, with its broken microwave and 3 chipped wooden tables. The other led straight to the elevator and down to the executive cafe, with its soft lighting, leather chairs, and meals plated by in-house chefs. Miles nodded. They went down. As Monica said, the executive cafe didn't check employee badges. The doors opened automatically. Inside, the lighting was warm and golden, the furniture dark walnut. Landscape paintings adorned the walls, and each table had its own server in crisp white uniforms. They walked in, found a two-top in the corner. No one stopped them. But they had barely sat down for 3 minutes when a man approached. Pastel shirt, narrow tie, an expression more watchful than welcoming. "Good afternoon," he said. His voice wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. "I'm Grant, senior coordinator for this area. You're dining in the executive section, right?" Monica nodded. "We're just grabbing lunch. I heard the buffet has Japanese-style fried fish today, yeah?" Grant smiled politely. "Of course. I just wanted to make sure everyone feels aligned with the space here. Some of our partner clients also dine in this area. And, if you're interns or internal support staff, the third-floor pantry might be more in line with protocol, just to avoid confusion." He finished his sentence still smiling, then walked away, not waiting for a reply. Monica didn't move. Her eyes stared ahead. Her hand froze mid-pour over a glass of water. Miles said nothing. He simply picked up a napkin, folded it carefully, and said softly, "That fish probably doesn't beat the broken microwave." Monica laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that cracked open from bitterness. "We should go," she said, standing. They left the table without touching their food. Back in the third-floor pantry, no one asked anything. But in the glances exchanged, Miles saw something familiar. Not surprise, but understanding. As if everyone there had once tried stepping into the executive cafe and had walked out the same way. The people in that room shared a pattern. Most were people of color, immigrants, those with accents not shaped by Ivy League campuses. There were no Ethans or Blakes or Whitneys. No one got invited for casual coffee catch-ups mid-meeting. That day, Monica told Miles she had once proposed starting a cafe for all, a space where everyone could eat lunch together, without zones. The idea wasn't rejected through arguments. It was erased through silence. No feedback, no meetings, just nothing said, and nothing said again. A week later, during a small intern roundtable, Miles overheard something telling. A young white intern named Kevin, blonde, Georgetown student, shared that he had been granted CRM access to learn about high-level client relationships. Meanwhile, Danny, the Asian intern, was restricted to Google Sheets and tasked only with data entry. Miles checked quietly later. Sure enough, Kevin's credentials included view and edit sample contracts. Danny's only allowed view. No explanation for the difference. No questions asked. And that made it worse. Chancellor's questions began forming more sharply in his mind. This was a professional system, but what happens when its standards are just a polished cover for institutional bias? Had they built an entire hiring, promotion, and reward model based on cultural familiarity rather than actual merit? That weekend, alone again in the storage room, Miles opened his personal laptop. He began documenting every moment so far: the incident at the executive cafe, the unequal access granted to interns, the microwave left broken for 3 months, and the email Monica had once shared, her Cafe for All proposal. He wrote the first line with restraint. The problem isn't with a person, it's with a space where bias hides behind polite smiles. And he knew, if he wanted to dismantle a system like this, he couldn't do it as a CEO. He had to do it as an intern. He had to be overlooked, forgotten, because only then could he witness everything the reports would never print. The central printer on the 3rd floor had been misfiring since Wednesday. Every time someone sent a document from their computer, it would spit out pages at erratic speeds, sometimes clumped together, sometimes flying off the tray entirely. Some documents came out misformatted, with overlapping text or missing sections. It had been notified 3 times. Their response was always the same familiar line: still operational, not urgent. And so the printer continued to operate, in the most dysfunctional sense, for 10 straight days. That morning, Monica was the first to arrive at the office. She needed to urgently print a revised contract for the legal team, a document she had spent the entire previous evening reviewing because one clause didn't align between payment terms and property rights. Miles walked into the office just as she was checking the jammed paper inside the machine. "Not worth calling it," she muttered. "You just have to pull it slowly." But as she gently tugged at the lower tray, a metal rod popped loose, and the entire 60-page document spilled across the floor. Monica crouched down to gather the sheets, just as Philip Carmichael walked by. Philip was the director of contract oversight, a white man in his 40s, clean-cut, always in a pastel dress shirt and striped tie. He had a way of speaking that initially sounded encouraging, but a few seconds in, you'd realize he was cutting you down. Philip didn't like Monica. It was never spoken aloud, but everyone knew. He had previously objected to her transfer from the content team to legal, citing insufficient seniority to handle sensitive materials. Monica had heard the remark in a meeting she wasn't invited to, but the door had been left slightly open. When he walked in and saw Monica scrambling to gather papers, Philip stopped. "Again, Monica," he said, louder than necessary. "Printer broken or just user error?" A few heads turned from nearby desks. Monica tried to stand, arms full of crooked papers. "Sorry, it jammed. I was printing the revised Wyatt contract." Philip stepped forward, snatched the pages from her arms, flipped through a few and shook his head. "Inconsistent fonts, sloppy margins, and here you wrote shall, there you wrote will. Are you sure you understand the future tense in legal drafting?" The room fell silent. Monica stared at her shoes. Her eyes were red, but her voice remained steady. "I'll recheck it. The master file is still on my desktop." Philip shook his head again and tossed the stack onto her desk. "Don't bother. Let someone qualified rewrite it from scratch. You should go back to the content team. Maybe your grammar will do less damage there." Then he turned and walked out. Miles sat 3 desks away. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched Monica, now seated, face blank, hands gripping the edge of the desk as if letting go would shatter her. No one said a word. No one stood. Because that was the most terrifying part of the culture at Elridge and Miles. Silence as survival. That lunch hour, Monica didn't join the intern group. Miles found her in the storage room, the same dim one, its fluorescent bulb still flickering. She wasn't crying, but her eyes stared into space like she was questioning whether any of her effort was worth it. "I used to think," she said, "if I worked twice as hard, I'd get recognized. But maybe that's not it. Maybe I need the right family, the right hair, the right face." Miles sat beside her, saying nothing, just handed her a bottle of water. Thanks, she said with a bitter smile. You must think it's funny, right? A Princeton girl getting called out for not knowing how to use the future tense. No, Miles replied softly. I just feel sad. Sad that a company doesn't know what it's holding in its hands. That night, long after everyone had gone, Chancellor returned to the office. He opened the contract Monica had revised, and he knew she was right. Her language was precise. Her revised clause was logically airtight. It simply wasn't written in Philip's style. Hyper-standardized, clinical, and soulless. He saved her original draft to his private hard drive, then opened his phone camera. He recorded the entire printer area, captured the machine's broken state, and documented the assignment chart showing no one was fixing it. Then he opened his personal notes and added a line. Today, Monica was publicly humiliated for being correct, but not being the right person. Philip wields control through language, and the system backs him with silence. Under that dim light, Chancellor Holt, the man once dismissed for wearing the wrong shoes, was starting to see the full structure of a termite-ridden system painted in gold. And he knew, to change it, he couldn't just expose one person. He had to map out the entire model. Monica didn't need rescuing. She needed to stand in the place she deserved. And to make that happen, he would have to let the printer jam again, and again, until the entire system collapsed under its own excuse of not urgent. Around 3 p.m. every day, the third floor of Elridge and Miles entered a state quietly known as the lull. It was that soft post-lunch drowsiness combined with the between-meeting slowdown, where every movement in the office seemed slower, quieter. Coordinators rushed to finish their printing. Admin assistants began piecing together tomorrow's schedule. Interns quietly cleaned up spreadsheets or replied to emails ending with the familiar phrase, "Please see attached." It was during this hour that, if you sat alone in the storage room at the end of the hallway, lights off and door slightly cracked, you could hear more than any training seminar this company had ever offered. Miles, still the intern, still invisible, began leaving that door cracked. He sat there silent as a pencil mark not yet erased, his ear angled toward the hallway. And what he heard wasn't conspiracy. There were no whispers of money laundering, bribery, or legal loopholes. What he heard was more dangerous, the normalization of bias. Wednesday afternoon, two mid-level directors, a man and a woman, entered the hallway from the West Conference Room. They had no idea anyone was sitting behind the cracked door of the storage room. They were just passing through, close enough, long enough, for their words to bounce off the walls and slip through the gap. "Monica," said the man's voice, "I've read her file. Competent, sure, but not really the right energy for legal. She'd be better suited to CSR." The woman chuckled softly. "Exactly. Every time she speaks, it feels like a TED Talk. What we need is precision. And I think she's connected to some nonprofit, community outreach something. Not sure, but it makes me question whether she can stay neutral reviewing client documents." Then they walked away, but their words didn't. Miles sat still, eyes no longer surprised, only certain. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was proof. A person being judged not because they were wrong, but because they were different. A system that only accepted precision when it was spoken in the right tone, by the right voice, in the right kind of suit. The next day, Miles ran a quiet test. He adjusted his system permissions to allow himself access to internal email threads shared within his team. Messages that weren't confidential, but which no one expected an intern to read. In one thread about staff rotation, he found this line, written by a recruiting manager to the accounting department. "I recommend passing on the applicant named Tyrese Johnson. Qualifications are fine, but that kind of name tends to make clients hesitate." Miles read it 3 times, not because he doubted what he was seeing, but because he wanted to memorize every word. That kind of name. One short sentence, one hiring decision, and potentially one life derailed. Not because of competence, but because of a name. Over the next week, Miles paid closer attention. He noticed that he, under the intern name, was being given document tasks later than Kevin, the white intern who started the same day. Kevin was invited to meetings labeled highlighting productivity initiatives, while Miles was asked to make photocopies of the presentation slides. No one was overtly disrespectful. It was just natural. Like Monica being assigned to proofread, but never allowed to sign off. Like Danny, the Asian intern, sharing a desk with the tech department while promising interns had desks by the windows. On Friday, Philip showed up near the printer again, this time talking on the phone. He didn't know Miles was sitting in the storage room behind the thin wall. Philip's voice was loud, confident, unguarded. "We need someone who looks like the kind of person you can see yourself in," he said. "Light brown skin, straight hair, smiles a lot, safe background. Someone the client won't feel preached to by." A laugh echoed from the other end of the call. Philip continued, "Not saying the others are bad, they just don't represent what we're selling." Miles closed his eyes. He didn't record, didn't take a photo. He didn't need to. What he was collecting wasn't evidence for a lawsuit, but clues for a reform. That night, in a short-term rental 7 blocks from company headquarters, Chancellor opened his personal laptop. He created a new folder and named it Silent Mechanics. Inside, he began logging every conversation, every comment, every seemingly minor decision that had quietly shaped the company's culture. His final entry that night, typed slowly, read, "The problem here isn't a single bad person. It's a system that allows small wrongs to repeat until they become standard." Then he hit enter. The third-floor storage room didn't have a name on the internal office map. According to the system, it was simply STO 3F07, a square box at the end of the hallway, not big enough to hold important records, but just deep enough for someone looking to hide to occasionally call it shelter. For more than 10 straight days, Chancellor Holt, under the alias Miles Chandler, had turned the room into a quiet observation post. But that night, it became more than a paper storage closet. It became the only refuge left for someone on the verge of losing her reason to keep trying. Monica arrived later than usual. She didn't bring lunch like before. Just a bottle of water and an old phone lit up with a photo of 3 people. A little girl about 7, an older woman, and Monica herself. No makeup, hair down, smiling brightly. She placed the phone on the shelf, leaned back against the wall, and exhaled like someone stepping out of a battlefield. She didn't turn on the light, but Miles was already sitting in the corner, quiet as a shadow. When she closed the door, the glow from the phone screen revealed them to each other. "Oh, sorry," she said softly. "I didn't know anyone was here." "It's all right," Miles replied, not getting up. "I came for some quiet, too." Monica sat a few feet away, leaning against a box labeled HR-2017. Neither of them spoke for nearly 2 minutes. Then she broke the silence. "I know the printer issue wasn't my fault, and I know Philip doesn't like me. But sometimes, even knowing that, I still feel like I need to apologize." Miles looked at her, eyes free of judgment. "Because if you don't apologize, you're afraid they'll find another way to make you disappear?" She turned toward him, slightly stunned. "Yes, you get it. Every time I do something right and still get scolded, I'm not afraid of being wrong. I'm afraid of being labeled, the difficult one. And once you get that label, they don't need reasons anymore to push you out." Miles nodded slowly. "Sometimes I think companies like this have too many procedures, but not enough reflection." Monica smiled, not out of happiness, but out of surprise. For the first time, someone in the company had said exactly what she'd always thought. She closed her eyes briefly and exhaled. "I used to want to become a community financial advisor. Not like stocks and investment portfolios. I wanted to help immigrants, people working 3 jobs, no savings accounts, no clue about credit scores. I wanted to teach them how to read rental agreements, how to avoid predatory loans. I used to think, if I could just get into a financial firm, learn how it really runs, I'd go back and help them." Miles tilted his head gently, asking, "And now?" Monica was silent for a moment, then answered, not with tears, but with a hoarse voice. "Now I just want to survive here without being judged for how I breathe. I stopped dreaming a long time ago." The air in the room thickened. Miles rested his hands lightly on his knees, but didn't rush to respond. He knew what Monica had just shared wasn't meant to invite pity. It was a confession, not to him, but to herself. Sharing a lost dream, for someone like her, took more courage than any proposal ever could. "You know," he said slowly. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't holding on to a dream. It's daring to pick it back up after you've already dropped it. Monica turned to him, her gaze no longer guarded. You sound like someone who's lost something before. Miles smiled. I used to own a car repair shop. Small place. 4 mechanics, 1 greasy parking lot. I thought I'd open a second one, maybe a third. Then one day an investor offered to buy it. I sold. They turned it into a chain, and I started over from scratch. And now? Now I'm an intern without a desk. They both laughed, this time genuinely, the kind of laugh born from a shared sorrow, not to joke about it, but to let a little light in through all the walls. Monica rested her head against the filing cabinet. I don't need anyone to lift me up. I just want to be left alone to do my job right. I don't want to smile more. I don't want to talk like someone else. I just want to be me and be evaluated as me. Miles looked at her for a long moment. Then he said softly, You don't need to change anything. They're the ones who need to relearn how to see people. That night back at his apartment, Chancellor didn't open his laptop right away like he usually did. He sat in the dark for a while longer. That conversation wouldn't go straight into his notes, not because he lacked the data, but because this wasn't data anymore. This was a person, a dream cornered, a talent dimmed, not because it wasn't strong, but because it didn't match the mold. And he understood. If this time he only observed and didn't act, then he was no different from everyone else who passed Monica every day and never stopped. The legal team meeting was held on the first Tuesday morning of every month, typically lasting an hour and 15 minutes, and rarely straying from the usual script. Philip Carmichael presiding, opening with a recap of documentation errors, followed by progress reports from smaller sub-teams, then policy updates, and finally someone saying a few motivational words before the room exhaled collectively, relieved that nothing terrible had happened. But this time, the agenda had one small change, a change proposed by Philip himself, allowing Monica Carlton to present her suggested revisions to the new appendix contract with Wyatt Partners, a multi-tiered agreement that had previously caused issues in the audit round. Monica being asked to speak in an important internal meeting was unexpected, and to her it wasn't an opportunity, it was a test, because Philip had never willingly handed the floor to someone he didn't consider polished enough to represent. Chancellor Holt, in his role as Miles Chandler, sat in the back corner of the room, notebook in hand, eyes locked on Monica the moment she stood up. She wore a crisp white button-up, a black skirt that fell below the knee, her hair neatly pinned back, black-rimmed glasses. No makeup, no flashy styling, no putting on a show, as Philip had once mockingly described another female employee in an internal email. Monica stepped up to the projection station, plugged in her USB, opened her slides, and tested the mic. Her voice was steady, not fast, not slow, not trying to charm. I propose categorizing clauses into 3 types: fixed, flexible, and contingent upon risk party B. The reason is that the current grouping merges financial factors with legal behaviors under a single framework, creating ambiguity when enforcing penalty terms. She hadn't finished the sentence when Philip cut in. Hold on a second, Monica. Could you define contingent upon risk party B more clearly? Sounds a bit fuzzy. Monica nodded. I define it as clauses that adapt based on Party B's actual behavior during the contract period. For example, if Party B has a history of delayed payments, the penalty clause would trigger earlier, rather than waiting the standard 30-day grace period. She clicked to the next slide. It had a diagram, a citation, a real-world example. Philip looked at the chart and smirked. I've never seen anyone phrase it like that in a contract. Earlier if Party B has risk? Is that present continuous or future perfect? The room fell silent. Someone looked down. A few others held in laughter. Philip turned to the contract team lead seated to his left. Will, do you know what tense that sentence is in? Will forced a smile. I'd guess. Creative? A few muffled chuckles followed. Monica stood still. Her eyes didn't blink. One hand on the remote. Her voice dropped lower. I'm aiming for clarity so the partner understands our terms. We're not writing literary fiction. We're writing to mitigate risk, and contract language should serve logic first. Philip jumped back in. Good. Then I'll ask Nathan, who's drafted contracts for 3 mergers, to help rephrase it for more logical clarity. For now, let's pause the presentation here. Monica, thank you for your effort, but we need consistency in language, not emotional interpretation. Miles didn't look away from her once. She didn't push back, but she didn't retreat either. She simply walked back to her seat, pulled out a pen, opened her notebook, and wrote something. Quickly, precisely. She didn't look back at the projector. She didn't smile to ease the tension. She didn't explain further. And in that moment, Chancellor realized this woman had just been pushed out of the only space she ever believed she could speak in. The meeting ended with the sound of shuffling papers and chairs dragging. People stood, laughing and chatting, as if they hadn't just witnessed a public shaming. They passed Monica, none of them meeting her eyes for more than 3 seconds. Miles left last, silently stepping out of the room and taking the stairwell instead of the elevator. He needed a private corridor, no voices, no faces, to stop himself from reacting on instinct. That evening, he reopened Monica's slides. Every argument she made held water. Her clause categorization method was a model already adopted in several legal firms across Europe. The grammar wasn't wrong. It wasn't traditional, but it was correct. He opened another PDF, Harvard Law School's Contract Drafting Guidelines. The exact phrasing Monica had used was even recommended for multi-party negotiation documents. And yet, at Elridge and Miles, she'd been silenced for being too subjective. Chancellor opened his silent mechanics folder and began a new entry, typed slowly. Today, a competent person was turned into a punchline. Not because she was wrong, but because she spoke differently. And that entire room, they laughed. Not because it was funny, but because they needed to survive. Right beneath it, he added, "We can no longer wait." The following Tuesday, 5th floor conference room, an extended joint meeting of the Legal and External Affairs Divisions, a major quarterly event. This time, senior representatives from the board of directors were in attendance. As always, Philip Carmichael was the lead facilitator. Soft lighting, pre-brewed coffee, and the stifling atmosphere of a meeting where everyone focused more on looking professional than saying what they really thought. Monica sat in the second-to-last row, far from the main stage. Since last week's meeting, she had barely spoken to anyone. She still arrived on time every morning, still worked diligently, but her voice was lower now, and her steps just a bit slower. Miles, Chancellor, had watched her all week without intervening, because he knew if he didn't act at the right moment this time, he would no longer deserve to face himself. Philip opened the meeting as usual, with a soulless report and a few industry insider jokes. Then he moved on to the Wyatt Partners contract update. "We've restructured the clauses to be fully standardized," he said, avoiding all subjective language. Monica proposed an alternative version, but the internal legal board has decided Nathan's draft will be submitted. He glanced around the room, his tone tinged with sarcasm. "Hopefully this time, we won't get another suggestion for emotional categorization." A few quiet laughs spread through the room. Monica stared straight ahead, not angry, not defeated, but the light in her eyes was gone. That's when Chancellor stood. No one noticed at first, just another intern, name tag reading Miles Chandler, sitting in the back row. He stood slowly, unhurried, walking toward the front podium and raising a hand gently. "Excuse me, may I say a few words?" Philip furrowed his brow, surprised. "Sorry, this portion is reserved for executive leadership." "Just 2 minutes," Chancellor said. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed like water hitting the walls of a sealed room. One of the board members, Letitia Granger from New York, nodded. "Let him speak. I'm curious what an intern has to say today." Chancellor turned, now facing the entire room. No title, no power suit, no slides, just a man and a voice. "Apologies if what I say doesn't follow protocol," he began, his eyes sweeping slowly across the room. "But I believe the issue isn't whether we use shall or will. The issue is who's allowed to use those words." The room fell silent. "Last week, I listened to Monica present a contract proposal that was clear, logical, and more modern than most templates used by our international partners. But instead of receiving technical feedback, she was questioned about verb tense. Someone shifted in their seat. Someone else felt the room grow warmer, despite the air conditioning. I reviewed that contract myself. It wasn't just valid, it was advanced. I've seen similar documents in London, Paris, Singapore, and I can say with certainty, it was not wrong. The only issue here was that the person presenting it happened to be named Monica Carlton. Philip started to rise. Chancellor raised a hand. I'm not finished. He took one step closer, slower, firmer. I wasn't always in this industry. I've been turned away from boardrooms for wearing sneakers. I've overheard staff mocking others behind their backs because they couldn't pronounce someone's name. I've sat in storage rooms just to hear what people say when they think no one's listening. Now the atmosphere began to shift. People straightened in their chairs. A few directors exchanged glances. Letitia Granger's brow furrowed. Chancellor lowered his voice, but it didn't lose power. My name is not Miles Chandler. My name is Chancellor Holt. I'm the majority shareholder of this company. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. And then the entire room froze. Philip took half a step back. Monica turned, eyes wide, lips parted but speechless. A few attendees leaned forward, trying to see more clearly. Letitia stood up abruptly. Wait, Mr. Holt? Chancellor turned to her and nodded. Yes, I disguised myself to enter this company as a low-level employee, because I believe that only when you're not respected can you truly see the core of a system. He pulled a thick folder from his leather bag and placed it on the center table. This is a collection of transcripts, discriminatory conversations, name-based applicant rejections, internally manipulated documents, and unfair personnel decisions. Then he turned to Monica. But the reason I decided to act was when someone who was right was turned into a joke. Just because the way she spoke didn't sound familiar to the ears in the room. He took a deep breath. And today I speak not just to defend her, but to tell this entire company. From now on, every voice will be heard. No one will be dismissed for how they stand, how they breathe, or how they conjugate a future perfect verb. No one said a word. Philip's face had gone ghost white. Monica's hands clutched the arms of her chair. Letitia stepped forward and picked up the folder. Mr. Holt, what do you intend to do? Chancellor looked her directly in the eye. I intend to clean house, and I'm starting by finding out who truly deserves to stay. Thursday, 9 a.m. The entire 6th floor of Elridge and Miles, the executive suite usually closed off and guarded, was unexpectedly crowded. Those who had never stepped foot there before were personally invited via name-tagged emails. Those who had sat there for years started to realize their chairs weren't as secure as they thought. The largest conference room, labeled Boardroom A, was lit early. On the main screen, there were no charts or financial slides, just one bold line in black capital letters on a white background. Review, restructure, repair. Chancellor Holt entered the room first. No blazer, no tie. Just a dark blue button-up with sleeves rolled up one notch. Monica Carlton was invited to sit on his left, beside Letitia Granger, the only board member who had stood up in last week's meeting to say, "Let him speak." On his right sat a new legal team flown in from the New York office, people with no personal ties to the existing leadership. They were invited for one reason, to be outsiders, so they could see inside clearly. Philip Carmichael entered last, his face pale, his eyes scanning the room like he was searching for an escape route. But there were no exits left. His chair was still there, but it was no longer a symbol of power. It was now the seat where one listens to an indictment. Chancellor began with a voice as light as the first breeze of spring, but carrying more weight than a siren. We were once one of the most admired firms in the industry, but what I witnessed over the past 3 weeks proves that appearances do not always match what lies beneath. And today, we face that. He raised his hand. Monica tapped her laptop. On screen appeared email excerpts. That kind of name gives the wrong impression. We need energy that's easier to digest for clients. And most notably, the hallway voice recording where Philip had clearly said, "We need light brown skin, straight hair, lots of smiles." Philip straightened in his seat. I can explain." Chancellor raised his hand. Not high, not loud, but enough to hush the entire room. You'll have your time to speak, but not right now, because when Monica stood at the podium last week, she wasn't allowed to finish her sentence either. Letitia leaned toward Chancellor and whispered, "How are we handling this?" Chancellor didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Philip. "Immediate suspension from all positions. Personnel files handed over to the independent review team. From today, all meetings will be recorded in full. This company has no space left for leadership based on prejudice." Some in the room exhaled, as if a boulder had been lifted from their chest. A few sent messages under the table. Others remained silent, not out of fear, but because they were starting to feel hope. Chancellor moved to the next phase. He announced the restructuring of the entire HR department, splitting recruitment and training into separate units, launching a task force to audit all personnel decisions from the past 24 months. "We will trace every rejection based on name, voice, or non-fitting credentials. If we were wrong, we will apologize. If necessary, we will compensate. If people no longer want to return, at least they will know someone saw what they endured." Monica looked at him. In her eyes, something had been restored. Not necessarily trust, but affirmation. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't weak. She was right. And finally, someone had the courage to say it aloud. Chancellor wasn't finished. He appointed Monica to lead the newly created Equity Task Force, a unit with authority to intervene in every hiring, performance review, and benefit decision. A group with an independent voice, not to paint a picture of diversity, but to scrutinize every deviation, no matter how small. When Letitia asked, "Is this like those diversity teams other companies are piloting?" Chancellor responded simply, "No. This is a Justice Department." The room went silent for 3 seconds. Then came scattered applause, and soon the whole room stood. No one gave the order. No one prompted it. But everyone understood. This morning was unlike any other. A company doesn't change through policy alone. It must be reformed. Through will. After the meeting, as people filtered out, Chancellor stood by the door. Philip was the last to leave. He paused as if wanting to say something. Chancellor spoke only one sentence. "I don't hate you, Philip, but I don't trust people who know they're wrong and still live comfortably with it." Then he turned away. That afternoon, Monica returned to her old desk. On it sat a small white card. No name, no sender. Just one neatly written line. "Welcome to the room where you belong." Just 1 week after the house cleaning meeting on the 6th floor, the atmosphere at Elridge and Miles had shifted so dramatically that even newcomers could feel it in the simplest way, by listening. Hallway conversations became more cautious. No more whispered labels. No more smirking innuendo. Internal emails that once leaned on coded metaphors about cultural fit were now sent with more direct and public language. Those who once thrived on soft power, the kind that flows through glances, connections, and handshakes in the dark, began to grow wary. No one knew what Chancellor would do next, but everyone knew he wasn't done. Then the following Monday morning, every employee received an invitation to a meeting. Not mandatory, but strongly encouraged. Location: the ground floor auditorium. No sender name, just one line. Respect first, a declaration. The hall was packed. No one overdressed. Many had skipped the tie since the invitation didn't call for a dress code. On stage, there was no corporate banner, just a plain wooden podium, a simple microphone, and a white curtain drawn across the back. No dramatic lighting, no background music. Chancellor stepped onto the stage in near total silence. He carried no laptop, no printed speech. Just a single sheet of paper, folded twice, tucked into the pocket of his button-up shirt. He pulled it out, unfolded it gently, and looked down at the room. "We've repaired the system," he began, "like changing the lock on a door that was once forced open. But I'm not here to talk about old doors. I'm here to talk about the foundation beneath them." He raised his head. "I grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. My father used to say, they can take your money, your reputation, even your life, but no one can take the way you treat others. That's yours, and it's the only thing you can leave behind that doesn't require a will." He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old ID badge, the one that read Miles Chandler. He held it up. Wearing this badge taught me more than any strategy meeting I've ever attended. I learned that dignity isn't something outlined in a company manual. It's revealed in how we treat people who don't look like us, in who gets to speak, in who's allowed to finish a sentence. The room was still. Monica sat in the front row, taking no notes for the first time. Letitia Granger leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, nodding quietly with every sentence. Chancellor continued, I'm establishing a fund called Respect First. It will support three things. 1. Scholarships for students who've been rejected for not looking the part. 2. Funding for internal leadership training specifically for those who've been underestimated. And 3. A real anonymous reporting system with authority, not just acknowledgement. If an employee feels mistreated, they won't need to send a desperate email. They'll have a direct line, and I'll read every message myself. Applause began, not polite, not contagious, but the kind that starts when the heart reaches agreement with the mind. Chancellor raised a hand to pause it. We're not clapping for me. We're clapping because, for once, an investment firm is choosing to invest in people before profit. A few moments later, he invited Monica to join him on stage. No prepared speech. She walked up, her hands slightly trembling, eyes cast downward. Then she spoke, in her own voice, unpolished, unfiltered. I used to think I didn't belong here. I used to think I had to change myself to be allowed to stay. But today I'm standing here not because I changed, but because someone finally saw me. And now I will help see others. The entire auditorium rose to their feet. This time no invitation was needed. Chancellor stepped back, letting Monica stand alone at the center of the stage. And in that moment, the whole company, with every skin tone, accent, and background, stood not to celebrate, but to witness. That day at the Elridge and Miles headquarters, for the first time in company history, there was no transcript of the meeting, because no one was sitting down to take notes. Everyone was standing. 3 days after the launch of the Respect First Fund, an email went out to every employee with a simple subject line: Open forum, one voice at a time. The body contained just 2 lines. No agenda, no presentation slides, just people who want to speak and those who choose to listen. Time, 3 p.m. Location, the ground floor auditorium, the same room where a speech had once brought the entire company to its feet. This time no one was officially invited, but no one wanted to miss it. Chancellor arrived early, as he always did. He didn't sit in the front row. He chose a seat along the outer edge of the auditorium, like a true audience member. Monica arrived later carrying a folder, not to present, but to take notes. Letitia Granger was also present, for the first time without her assistant. The people who were once nameless inside the system now took front row seats, not because of rank, but because they finally believed they deserved to hear everything clearly. A single microphone stood in the center of the room. No podium, no introduction. If you wanted to speak, you stepped forward. If you wanted to listen, you stayed. The first speaker was a maintenance worker. He shared a story about having a proposal rejected because of poor punctuation, even though the content was accurate. The second was a Middle Eastern intern. He recounted being stopped at the entrance once because his name wasn't on the list of easy-to-pronounce names. The third, a white employee, admitted that he had once stayed silent while others mocked Monica's accent, and that today he wasn't here to defend himself, but to relearn how to be an ally. And then, the next person to step up made the entire room seem to stop breathing. Kristen, the receptionist who had turned Chancellor away on his first day in the building. She wore a light gray dress, her hair tied back neatly, no makeup, no name tag, no desk in front of her. Today she stood before everyone and before herself. She gripped the microphone with both hands. It took her a few seconds to speak, but when she did, her voice was clearer than anyone's before. I'm here today not because I was asked, she said, but because I can't keep being the quiet one. The room was so silent you could hear the rustle of fabric. Kristen took a deep breath. I'm the one who didn't let Mr. Chancellor into the building on his first day. I looked at his shoes, his clothes, his hair, and I decided he didn't belong here. She swallowed and continued. No one told me to do it. No one ordered me to turn him away. And that's exactly the problem. I was taught, quietly, that some types of people belong outside. And I followed it like it was instinct. She scanned the room, pausing longest at Chancellor, who sat still, without a nod or a reaction, like a mirror that didn't distort. "I'm sorry," Kristen said, her voice now trembling. "Not because anyone criticized me, because truthfully, no one did, but because I let my silence help grow what was already wrong." A moment later, she added, in a quieter tone, "I saw you walk away, and I thought, at least he didn't say anything. But now I understand. Not everyone who stays silent agrees. Some are just remembering." She lowered her head and pulled a folded sheet of paper from her pocket. "I rewrote our front desk protocol. No more judging by appropriate attire or professional attitude at first glance. I sent it to HR this morning. But that's not an apology. That's a commitment." She looked up, eyes red. "The apology is what I offer you, Mr. Chancellor Holt. The man I once judged with narrow eyes while he looked at me with a silence wider than this room." Then one line not written in her notes. "Thank you for not using your power to punish me, but instead using kindness to make me face myself." No one clapped right away. No one wanted to interrupt the moment. Kristen stepped down from the mic and walked back to the last row, not waiting for applause. But Chancellor stood, walked to the center of the room, picked up the mic, and said only one sentence. "None of us were born knowing everything, but we all have the choice to relearn. And anyone who can apologize in public deserves a chance to begin again." Then came the applause, sincere, swelling, not for spectacle, but because hearts had expanded and justice had found its gentlest way to heal. That day, no one remembered how many people spoke, but everyone remembered one thing. Kristen apologized, and Chancellor nodded. The day Chancellor Holt left Elridge and Miles, there was no grand farewell, no sheet cake with the company logo, no oversized group photo printed and framed in the lobby. But everything he left behind remained, and it would last longer than any executive's name ever printed on internal letterhead. It was a Friday morning. Chicago's skies weren't sunny nor rainy, just wrapped in a quiet gray that hung over the city's glass buildings. But inside the third floor of Elridge and Miles, everyone could feel something final had shifted. Monica noticed it first. She arrived earlier than usual, out of habit, and as she passed by Chancellor's old desk, still affectionately called Miles' desk by nearly everyone, she saw something sitting neatly on its surface, a pair of gray New Balance sneakers, old but carefully cleaned. Next to them, a folded note handwritten in black ink. "I walked into this place in these shoes, and I saw more than I expected. I'm leaving, not because there's nothing left to do, but because some of you are ready to keep walking. Shoes don't decide who gets heard. Only the heart and kindness can do that." There was no signature, but Monica knew, and so did everyone else. It didn't need one. Chancellor Holt was no longer in the building, but his footprints remained, in the way people now spoke to each other, in the HR decisions that were being re-reviewed, in meetings where junior staff finally dared to challenge leadership without fear of being silenced. That same day, the new HR team released an internal code of conduct titled the Right Shoes Policy. It wasn't about footwear. It was about the right to walk through a door, no matter who you were, what you wore, or where you came from. The policy's opening line quoted Chancellor directly, "If you need the right shoes to be treated with dignity, this company doesn't deserve you." Downstairs, Kristen, the receptionist once seen as the face of unconscious bias, was now the first person entrusted with training new hires on the respect-first culture. She began orientation sessions with her own story. "I once turned someone away because of their shoes, and that man was the first to teach me compassion without ever raising his voice." She didn't soften the details. She didn't shorten the truth. Because in the new culture, honesty wasn't weakness. It was strength. A month later, Monica received an invitation to speak at a diversity leadership forum in Boston. On stage, she shared the story of a Black CEO who once disguised himself as an intern, just to hear the voices hiding in the corners of his own company. At the end of her talk, she held up a single sneaker, not as a prop, but as a living symbol. "The man who wore this didn't just walk through my company. He changed it, one step at a time." Chancellor wasn't there that day. He was no longer in Chicago. Rumor had it he was down south, volunteering as an advisor for immigrant-owned small businesses. He didn't appear in the news, didn't accept speaking invites. But every week, Monica received an envelope, hand-delivered, no return address. Inside was a single note. This week, who was heard? And she knew. He was still watching, not to control, but to remind. Listening isn't a task, it's a legacy. On the final day of the quarter, the entire company was invited to sign a mural in the front lobby, an image of a single sneakered foot stepping across a painted boundary line. Beneath it, in bold letters, "This floor welcomes the right values, not the right shoes." Sometimes what changes a system isn't power, it's purpose-driven silence. A pair of wrong shoes, a glance at the right moment, a person willing to listen, to remember, and, in the end, to step forward. If this story moved you, made you feel a little warmer, a little stronger, or a little more outraged for what's too often ignored, share it. Because somewhere out there, someone is still being turned away, simply because they don't look right. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the stories that will restore your belief in human dignity. Drop a comment below. When was the last time you saw someone judged unfairly? And what did you do or wish you had done?